my legs, and legs not the best now. I can just carry them in, that's all. It's a miserable day out there by the looks of it. But
so you guys always do this, rain or shine?
Yeah, rain, hail or shine.
Every Friday now I come down in the morning, pick that up.
Ready for action, yeah. My hat there.
Drive down to Caringbah station. I drop that at the bus stop near the station. Then I have to drive a kilometre away to get parking. And then meet Dad at the station. He finds his way to the station and carry all our gear into town. It's about an hour trip into Martin Place. We're outside of Santos headquarters at Circular Quay for 30 weeks, but we weren't near any main roads, so we weren't capturing the passing traffic. We had a group meeting and decided to move up to Martin Place.
When I'm in there, I'm in the element. That's what keeps me going. You know, to think people are willing to spend their time and effort and so forth to think for the future of their children and their children's children.
The rain has stopped.
Oh, the sun shines bright on the goodies. We've got to go over to renewables. I'm terribly optimistic that the future is ours, not those of the fossil fuel merchants.
Yammer, that means welcome. I'm Elizabeth Mary Humble, better known as Mimi. I'm a Kamilaroi elder from Pilliga.
People would know that Santos have plans. The New South Wales government has given them their full support to build a coal seam gas production field.
Santos say in the Narrabri gas project that they plan around about 850 wells, which is going to produce salty water, approximately half as salty as seawater, which they will then treat at their Leewood processing plant.
From a farmer's perspective, my first concern is always water. I started looking at this in 2010 when the seismic testing happened around my property, and the more I educated myself about it, the more I decided that I really could not allow it to happen without trying to do something about it.
The Narrabri gas project involves drilling wells into the ground, into the soil, to approximately 1 kilometre down till they reach the coal seams. These wells are going through the recharge area of the Great Artesian Basin, will go down into the coal beneath the Great Artesian Basin, and somewhere along the line, after they've extracted the water from the coal seams, which they need to do to be able to get the gas out, the water will eventually flow into the coal seams from other areas and will deplete the potential amount of water that would normally go into the Great Artesian Basin supply.
I mean, we're talking about groundwater, massive industrialisation and the associated industry that goes with that. We're talking about access issues onto our land. We're talking about public liability issues. We're talking about land value issues. If you've got it on your property, you might be able to sell your land. If they could talk a farmer into taking gas on, he could be 100 kilometres away from me. But if he impacts the aquifer, the consequences could be huge. It could be felt 1,000 kilometres away.
You can insure for your own death, which is inevitable, and yet the facts are that you cannot insure against this industry.
It's about more than money. It's about clean air, clean water and land to grow clean, healthy food.
When it was taking off in Queensland, I couldn't believe how stupid our government was for allowing it in Australia and that it was that far advanced, and then found out it was the activity up in the Pilliga.
One of the first things that Santos said is that this is going to be a workforce of 1,300 people. And everyone thought, wow, that's incredible, 1,300 people. Now when the EIS is down, it's probably about a busload that will actually be living and working in this town. When the project side of it's up and away, all these people will be in, fly out. That accommodation will be out on the site, according to their plan, and also on the edge of town. Those workers never assimilate at all.
The image that the gas company want to try and portray is this lovely blue flame, you know, in your gas cooktop in your house. What they don't tell the Australian public is the devastation they're causing to get that gas.
Why? Why are they doing it? We've got to think of our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. What kind of life are they going to have if there's nothing there?
You don't get a single gas well, you get a gas field. So this is an aerial shot of some of the grid pattern forming in Queensland. You can have a gas well as close as 200 metres from your house that operates day and night. And isn't that a ripper? This is gas field infrastructure.
People need to realise that the first stage of this project, the 850 wells, is just the thin end of the wedge. There's another 6 gas fields.
And to give you an idea of the size of that, it's nearly equivalent to the size of Tasmania.
Country people know this will not work. Coal seam gas poses too great a risk to not only the environment, but to their business, their lives and their communities.
We are looking at the potential industrialisation of the northwest.
In Santos's EIS, they say they are not operating on a major recharge of the Great Artesian Basin. Rubbish. Sure, they're getting this coal seam gas and water from below the basin, but they're bringing it up to the top. Leewood and every other place, including here and every other drill site, is on top of a major recharge of the Great Artesian Basin.
It's just simply inconceivable that this industry can put at risk all these valuable agricultural areas.
Hi, I'm Warwick.
They have wasted huge amounts of money trying to con farmers into thinking that we can live and work together. In the end, I consider the resource sector as the biggest enemy of farming in Australia, by far.
This is a great country. It's a fantastic country. It's got so much to offer, so much to give, yet we're going to lose it. We are losing it.
It's about who we are as a country. Do we want to do things for the long term, or do we want to do things for a quick buck?
In my opinion, a region or community that is now earmarked for gas development is a sacrifice zone.
We don't like talking to cameras. We don't like locking onto trucks. We don't like this sort of stuff. We're only being pushed into this position because we just feel so frightened about what we're going to be facing in future generations.
We had a survey done in Gill where 98% said no.
This area here, there's been 3.2 million hectares surveyed. 96% have said they categorically do not want this industry.
Entire shows, entire areas people have said, no, you are making a big mistake. Don't do this.
The community has looked at the practical reality of a mature coal seam gas industry in Queensland, in the United States, and they've said no. This industry does not have a social licence. Those practical farmers out in northwest New South Wales who know their soil, know their environment, know their community, know the way the Great Artesian Basin works, know that this industry is a massive risk.
What we've seen in New South Wales are licences cancelled and brought back. We've seen it go down from 60% of the state covered down to what they say is 5%. And what's left is all of the Santos land. So we're feeling very alone out here. Why are we being sacrificed for an unnecessary industry?
Generations of families here have, toiled 7 days a week in the most amazing conditions. They're the backbone of this country that have provided food for a growing nation.
We hear on the radio people like Ian McFarlane saying that the Pilliga's goanna country, which is almost trying to condone the activity out there. But we see it differently. We see that the Pilliga forest is a recharge zone for the Great Artesian Basin.
Santos had this great vision for our whole northwest. When they first came and started doing seismic testing, I remember that first meeting, they told us there could be up to 40,000 wells here on the Liverpool Plains.
The only thing that's stopping them is the magnificent fortitude, preparedness to stay in this battle for a long time that you see from many of the landowners around the country. I can't believe what I see, for example, in northwestern New South Wales.
The fight it's horrendous. It occupies all their time. It's insidious.
The farm is a very hard mistress. She demands our work all the time, and for something like this to sideswipe us is pretty hard to cope with.
It's not a struggle to fight it because we must, but we make sacrifices to be in that fight.
I feel for those farmers. They're the backbone of the country.
The community knows the most about the land. They know the most about the water, they know the most about the soils, they know the most about the rainfalls, they know the most often about the geology as well. They often know a good deal more than the miner could ever know with a 7,000-page EAS.
7,000 pages, I mean that's bigger than War and Peace. You know, really? I sit in meetings here and virtually everyone's got tertiary qualifications. We had a meeting with Tony Windsor, we had a barrister, we had 2 accountants, 2 nurses, a soil scientist, a surveyor, a rural scientist, and some people that run some very successful agri-businesses. So the idea that we're uneducated is a myth.
Why should a community not be able to stand up and say, listen, this doesn't suit us, this doesn't fit what we do, so back off and go away?
These are people's lives we're talking about. This is their business, this is their home.
This is bigger than just the effect on a farm or on a region. This is an industry which is going to have a terribly deleterious effect on the country as a whole.
When communities get themselves organised, they can do incredible things.
I'd like to think that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren would look back and think that their forebears cared so much about this that they were not frightened to stand up.
In most of history, the protesters have always been right, whether it was in Gandhi's day or protesting about the Iraqi war or suffragettes who were at the turn of the century in England. All those protests turned out to be right. And so that is something that sticks in my mind, that maybe history will judge us as being right, and hopefully they won't destroy all this beforehand.
Of all the natural resources, water has become the most precious. In an age where man has forgotten his origins and is blind even to his most essential needs for survival, water, along with other resources, has become the victim of his indifference.
We couldn't survive without underground water. A lot of people who don't even recognise it could not survive.
Groundwater is a critical resource. It's a slow-moving resource, but it's fundamental. It's something that underpins a lot of Australia and a lot of the world.
We see water as the most valuable product on the face of the earth.
I don't think people understand the significance of the Great Artesian Basin. It is a unique resource. It is the biggest underground water catchment area in the world. And once you pollute that, you can't unscramble the egg.
That basin has a great deal of layers of rock systems, we call them aquifers, that have water in them. And these are interlaced with coal-bearing deposits. So we're very concerned when you try to get the gas out of the coal that you will interfere with and destroy those valuable aquifers that have not only been important in the past, they're very important to us today.
Without the Great Artesian Basin, we don't have the ability to water our stock, our people, our crops. We lose our ability to produce food. And that's a message that really needs to get to the city people particularly, because we're all in this together. If we can't produce food, what are you putting in the kids' lunchboxes tomorrow morning?
We couldn't grow any of these crops without access to that groundwater.
In the city, there's not much understanding of what happens west of the Great Divide and just how important these aquifers are. In the city, there's this disconnect that milk comes from a carton, or the wool in your sweater is some magic thing that happens, and it's not. It is a really hard, tough industry where people battle hard to survive. And to add this extra layer of anguish on them in terms of worries about their underground water supply, I really wish the city would get more heavily involved.
The property Rockdale is 800 acres. We have immediately to the north of us a gas field, used to be called Dewhurst 8 exploration pilot. It's now called Dewhurst 13 to 18H. Immediately to the south of us, approximately 3.5 kilometres, we have another gas field, a pilot field, known as Dewhurst North. We sit on the eastern edge, shall we say, of the proposed Narrabri gas project, but right in the middle of it. As the crow flies, Bibbulwindi, 11 kilometres. Bohena, about 14 to 15. Leewood, about 18. The closest well is on the Dewhurst 13 to 18H. In a straight line, that would be about 1.8 kilometres from my house and my house bore. From my far bore, in a straight line, just on 1 kilometre.
Do you experience any effects from that?
Well, I'll put it this way, we're not in court because we think we did our own damage to our own water.
The artesian industry, our swimming pool industry, is built up on the water that comes through from about 2,000 feet down that's naturally hot. Then we also have very good stock and domestic water. The whole of Moree is watered by groundwater, and we drink it. It's that good that we just drink it. It's beautiful water.
Queensland and New South Wales in particular are joined together by the Great Artesian Basin. It is one of the great wonders of the world. I toyed with the idea of having a campaign to make it a World Heritage Area, and then someone said to me, but you can't see it, it's under your feet.
When you talk about the Great Artesian Basin, there's no image, it's all underground, it's hidden. Most people just don't get it. So what I wanted to do was show people what the Great Artesian Basin looks like. The rain clouds up on the right-hand side and the way it flows down out to the west. How are they not going to wreck it? Because we know that there's no integrity when it comes to wells.
It's our concern, and certainly Santos has recognised that this is a risk too, because in their referral to the federal government, they admit that their operations here at Narrabri will impact on the groundwater resources of the Gunnedah-Oxley Basin.
What's to say 10, 20, 30 years down the track that we start to get signs of the chemicals that they're using that's starting to flow through into our area, then head north back up into the basin, up into Queensland? It's an unknown, it's a massive, massive experiment.
To destroy a natural resource like the Great Artesian Basin system would be very, very unwise. So we need to be very careful when we're interfering with the way water flows in that basin. And you will interfere with the way water flows. Whenever you go into a coal measure and you reduce the pressure in the coal measure, of course water flows from high pressure to low pressure and must flow to where you've taken the water out.
The way they deal with contaminants to groundwater is also very, very worrying in this document. There is a lot of research now done both in the States and in Australia showing that methane will migrate into people's bores when you have this disturbance of the soil and disturbance of the groundwater aquifers. The data is absolutely solid, there is no question. That's not assessed at all in the document.
I mean, just the issue of managing the long-term legacy of thousands of gas wells that could connect all sorts of layers together as they degrade is a huge legacy that the society will have to pick up, and it'll be the taxpayer who will be picking up that cost.
If you damage an aquifer, there's no way you can repair it. It's damaged for good.
We know there is connectivity between the Great Artesian Basin and our alluvial water sources in the Namoi, which are critical for production and are relied upon by a community throughout the northwest of New South Wales.
If you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what the long-term impacts of this sort of activity is, then you should stop until you do know what they are. Because to take a risk on the aquifer is just beyond all comprehension.
I just challenge Santos to give us an ironclad guarantee that they will not harm the Great Artesian Basin. If they can't, we know they will, and that's just not acceptable.
people, I mean, you can't let this happen. You know, it's our water. It's our only water. You know, destroy this and that's it.
There's not unlimited water. There's a reservoir of water, and what's in that reservoir depends what's coming in and what's going out. And we should always understand that and see the cycle of water. Probably the most important thing I learnt was listening to an Aboriginal elder up in Darwin a long time ago when I was looking at water in Northern Australia. He said, "John, when you think about water, check what it's doing where it is before you move it, because it's doing something good where it is."
Gas, it's poisoning the water. It's shocking the way they've got these gas fields in the scrub. They're not happy about it. The farmers are not happy about it.
This particular area of Gomeroi country is the heart. If you were to hold up an outline of a human body up to our country, the Pilliga and Narrabri and this particular area falls within the heart place.
It is the heart of Gomeroi Nation. Pilliga is a place of many spears. It's our Gomeroi warriors training ground. Since time began, our warriors came here to train for war.
I've been asked to stand up. You know, my old people have said, boy, it's time for you to do what you got to do. I belong to a family, I belong to a clan group, and I belong to a tribe, so that bigger society is what it's about. Right now, I'm in the Pilliga State Forest, standing up for our land, our water, our country.
Myself and my nephew Nathan and Leslie, we locked on. We wanted to let the world know that First Nations people, Gamilaroi people, don't want the destruction of the land to continue.
Help stop Santos destroying our sacred lands. My old people are getting old, and it's not that they're not fighting, it's just that their needs are sore, their feet are sore.
We believe that everything's related and everything's connected. So you'll often hear Indigenous people talk about being that one with the earth, one with the trees, one with the animals, because we see them as relatives. We also believe that our whole life cycles, we get to experience all of the realms. So in this life I could be in human form, in my next form I'd be an animal, or I could be a plant. So if I were to go cut down a tree, I'm actually hurting somebody's relative or even my own.
It makes me cry to come back home and see this. It makes my heart ache to know, that they want to try and pollute our waterways.
That's what the action was all about, standing up to bring the light on coal seam gas and what it's actually doing, not only to the land but to the waters, because the connection between the Great Artesian Basin and where it actually goes, it's bigger than me.
It's our country and we've got to protect it. We're keepers of the land and protectors of the land. God gave us this land to look after, not to destroy.
Look how passionate we get, if someone did something to the memorials at Anzac Cove. That happened, just a bit over 100 years ago. We're talking thousands of years here that people, had a spiritual connection to the land, and we've got to respect that.
They've knocked out a lot of our sites. They're destroyed. We won't have anything for our children and grandchildren.
Pilliga is where our water is. Without that, then none of us live. So my grandkids will perish, your grandkids will perish, and every life form out there will perish when they take that last drop of water.
Ni ningu maranyali wunga narali. Our ancestors are always watching.
The issue in New South Wales is not gas supply. The issue is price.
What's happened is there's a glut of gas globally at the moment, and this glut was generated by an overinvestment in coal seam gas and in LNG projects and in shale gas globally. We've seen demand actually fall in key markets such as Japan, which is the world's largest importer of LNG, and Korea, which is the world's second largest importer of LNG. And all these projects have been brought on stream to cater for increased demand, and demand is simply not there.
What we have is a crisis of government policy, certainly. We totally understand that. But we don't have a crisis for supply of gas. We've got more gas in Australia than we can shake a stick at.
There is no gas shortage. It's just a fabricated lie.
It's a ridiculous situation that we keep getting told that there's a shortage of gas for consumption in New South Wales, but there's a hell of a lot of it being sold to overseas countries, so it's pretty hypocritical. Yeah, I mean, they just want to snap out of it. We're not stupid.
CSG is high-cost gas on a global scale because you have to keep drilling wells. It's the high-cost producer that gets in trouble, and these projects are in trouble right now.
They need to get every last drop of gas out for them to make their business viable. And so whatever's in the road is not of interest to them. It's about making money and appeasing their shareholders.
You go from the boom where there was everyone wanting to buy houses and rents went through the roof and businesses were employing people, to the production phase which they're currently in now. And there are now houses in places like Miles and Chinchilla that have been built that have nobody lives in and are unlikely to ever have anyone living in.
Even the big towns like Gladstone and Mackay, they're actually in rapid decline. I actually believe that this is an economic argument. It's bad for the state, it's bad for our economy regionally, it's bad for Santos and its shareholders. It makes absolutely zero sense. Yet, we have people rushing headlong thinking that this is the El Dorado, this is the industry that will save our region. Well, frankly, our region doesn't need saving. This region has an economy of $1 billion.
The Narrabri gas project is only part of Santos's problems. It built one of the 3 large export terminals at Gladstone. Already it has had to write off $2.6 billion. Now at Narrabri, they've written off $1.6 billion before they're even producing any gas. This is a financial disaster.
Well, it's been really interesting to watch how the Santos share price has dropped very dramatically, particularly in the last few days, but certainly over the last couple of years. They are in a lot of trouble, they have a lot of debt, that's without doubt.
My wife and I are actually Santos shareholders, incredibly unhappy Santos shareholders. We are sick and tired of them wasting and burning our money. We know there's approximately $2 billion being wasted on the Narrabri gas project. Torn up.
At the moment, Santos aren't doing very well at all in the stock exchange because people are waking up to the fact that what they're peddling is lies and it's harmful to all of us, to mice and for people.
We've got so much gas, it's ridiculous in Australia. We're the largest exporter of gas in the world. The people that argue that there's a shortage don't look at the market structure. There are only 5 companies that dominate production of gas and distribution of gas on the East Coast. Those 5 companies control the market and they are not releasing gas that they have at their disposal. And they are forcing up prices for domestic consumers such that at present you pay more in Victoria today than the same customer does at the wholesale level for gas in Japan.
You know how much royalties are being paid to the Queensland government by the coal seam gas industry, by the whole gas industry actually in Queensland? That's nothing. They are part of this big gas con, which is going to make zillions for themselves and give nothing back to the country.
Senator Lazarus was talking at a meeting at Narrabri about how the government makes no money out of coal seam gas. And we all went, what? And he said, if you stop coal seam gas mining tomorrow, you would not see a blip on our budget. He said, if you stopped it tomorrow, the people, the Australian people, the taxpayers, are not making a cent out of it. but the political parties get massive money out of it. A friend of mine who was there was a farmer, and she just said, aren't we stupid? She said, you think of all the money we've spent for the last 8 years, why didn't we just pool it all and just give it to the government? She said we'd have had a bit more clout.
It's very interesting to hear Santos say that they could supply up to 50% of New South Wales gas needs. They're not saying that they will, however.
The Narrabri project is not producing any cash. It is for sale.
We know they're trying to sell it. I think anybody that wanted to buy it would have to be, I can't think of any other word, conned by Santos, who would want a project that Santos don't want.
If it was so high up there as state significance, why is Santos trying to flog it off?
My godfathers, they're doing all of this in the food bowl of New South Wales, which is of state significance and will be in 1,000 years' time.
It seems in Australia, it's give me those bucks now, rather than thinking about the long term. What are we going to leave our grandchildren?
I first went out to Tara Chinchilla region in June 2012. And before that, everything was really quite theoretical on whether there was a risk, whether there wasn't a risk. Since then, I have become increasingly convinced that this is something that should not happen anywhere in Australia.
I'm very concerned with the Narrabri gas project. I think mums and dads in Narrabri should be very worried about the air pollution aspects of this project.
The thing about these wells and pipelines and so on, they all leak. Everything leaks. And it's not just methane that leaks. Methane is not toxic. It's flammable, but it's not toxic. It leaks along with a whole lot of other gases, which are toxic.
And those fugitive emissions are some of the most worrying outcomes of this industry. If you look at Santos's reports to the National Pollutant Inventory, they actually talk about the emissions of their gas processing, and they talk about the many thousands of tonnes of nitrous oxide, of carbon monoxide, of volatile organic compounds that the infrastructure puts out. Yet in this document, you get to the point and they say, no, it'll be negligible. There'll be no emissions from our infrastructure.
They didn't take account of what happens with the flares and the fact that there is up to 250 different toxic chemicals that are mobilised with the flares, and the fact that the flares also mobilise whatever's in the produce water. There's a photograph taken by Reverend Graham Slaughter of the flares as seen from his house 20 kilometres from Arana flare. This is a picture of a flare that is not burning cleanly. This is a picture of a flare that is putting untold quantities and unquantified quantities of toxins into the air that people are breathing.
Once you have air pollution and you have particle pollution, that dust, firstly, the dust allows the contaminants to attach and we can breathe them in, and that allows them to get into the body. But that dust also gets washed out every time it rains, and if you have a roof or a shed and the rain washes the dust and the dirt and the contaminants into your rainwater tank. And what we've seen in Queensland, where there has been some testing of rainwater tanks for people who live in the gas fields, we've seen quite nasty levels of contaminants, including things like cesium-137, which is a radioactive substance that the companies use for borehole logging.
In 2013, I did a survey out in the Tara, Chinchilla, Kogan area. Nosebleeds were a significant issue, headaches, skin rashes, a metallic taste which made people sick that they couldn't eat properly, extreme fatigue. What really concerned me were symptoms that could be related to neurological problems, and those were things like paresthesia, which is pins and needles. And what worried me most of all was that these were being reported in small children.
The Nadov family lives right next to a gas vent, 70 metres away from their bedrooms. And that's constantly emitting gas.
You can put a FLIR camera on there and just see the gases coming up. And they constantly complain about illness. Metallic taste in their mouth, constant headaches, vomiting and so on.
It's not just fugitive emissions of methane, it's also benzene, toluene, etc., which are these incredibly dangerous chemicals which cause all sorts of problems, nosebleeds, headaches, respiratory problems, some say spontaneous abortions, cancer clusters in the United States.
They ignored completely hydrogen sulfide. Extremely toxic, extremely irritant, very bad when it's up your nose, but it also causes irritation of the eyes, and it also causes neurological problems and dizziness and all the spectrum. In the Pilliga, people have been reporting the stench of hydrogen sulfide from the wells that are already there, and we know that in Queensland, hydrogen sulfide is one of the chemicals that have been implicated in the widespread contamination around Hopeland.
Benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene and xylene. We know that they are contaminants of gas and coal. We know that they come up in groundwater and produced water when it's brought out to let the gas flow. Yet benzene, toluene are not even considered, not even mentioned. I think benzene, the word is mentioned once in the whole of the massive document. So for a landowner, I would be going, well, hey, why aren't you dealing with this serious contaminant? What's going to happen with that? Is it going to be in the waste you're going to leave on my property?
The nosebleeds really are the immediate symptoms of the problems, because the chemicals are also being absorbed into their bodies.
Another group of chemicals, which the document does not deal with, are called polyaromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs for short. And they're a chemical that is pretty much released by this sort of process, the unconventional gas. Now, we know children that are exposed to that in their young years or in utero have ongoing health problems pretty much for the rest of their life.
There was a review of 150 studies, and what that found was that chemicals that are released during natural gas extraction may cause harm to human reproduction and development. There is strong evidence of decreased semen quality in men. There's a higher risk of miscarriage in women, and there's an increased risk of birth defects in children. As I kept going back out to the gas fields, the concern that keeps being raised is one of cancer, and cancer in clusters that people identify that they don't feel is right. Frankly, I quite agree. Near Bentley Park, which is one of the gas developments, in one of the family there's a child with leukemia. In another family there are 2 young adults with cancer, one with leukemia and one with a very rare type of sarcoma. On the other side of Bentley Park there's a lane where there are 6 families and there's cancer in 5 of the families. One of the very first concerns that was identified and was actually discussed in the Queensland Parliament was a cluster of pancreatic cancer. Now, pancreatic cancer you would expect would be something like 11 per 100,000 people. In this area, where about 50 people lived in an area about 10 kilometres, there were 3 people with pancreatic cancer.
So with the pancreatic cancer, you don't recover from
No, those 3 people are dead.
My research was into the mental health outcomes of the incursion of coal seam gas into the agricultural areas in Queensland and New South Wales. If you individually look at some of the responses, the mental health of those farmers is distressing.
What am I working for now? What am I working for when I have this storm on the horizon that is constantly encroaching? And if you dwell too much on it, then it does tend to lead you to despair.
I had trouble sleeping because I would visualise the impacts 30 years into the future. And for me that was extremely scary, and I was seeing that imagery in my head all the time.
How's it affected me? I think I've gone past the point where I can say it hasn't affected me.
The police came?
Oh yes, they were called. They were called. Friends called them because I threatened suicide.
And they took your guns?
All my weapon is gone, yes.
I had a breakdown
which was a culmination of trying to get the government to make this EIS more user-friendly. A local politician saying it's going to go ahead, all of that put together sort of, to me, just pushed me over the edge, because it just showed that nobody was really showing any interest. Listen to us. Please, we have the proof.
There's a huge health issue involved with this, and nobody wants to investigate it. They don't want to find it. They don't want to find it. If they find it, they've got to do something about it. The most tragic thing was the suicide of George Bender, you know, who'd had over 10 years of this. But it happens to a lot of other people, and they finally give way.
They knew that George was at a point of a stressful situation. They were very much aware of that. The appropriate steps for them should have been to back off, but they didn't. They came in and they went in harder and harder and harder.
The feeling I had was utter hopelessness. The feeling I had was that the whole gas project, the whole gas industry, all my problems were just coming down, and I couldn't stop it. Just coming down underneath it. I just couldn't stop it.
If you go to Google Maps, you can get a map of what the area around Chinchilla, Cogan, Dalby, Miles is like as is. And then if you superimpose the gas wells, the big question is, what did somebody think would happen? What did they expect in terms of collateral damage?
I actually heard somebody say the other day that we're, essentially being gassed to death.
I've been part of the RFS for 30 years. I'm Deputy Captain of the Willful Fire Brigade, which is one of the closest fire brigades on the eastern side, about 15 kilometres from here. So we've had a reasonable amount of Pilliga experience, and they're not to be underestimated, Pilliga fires.
The last fire through here was December '06. Because it was no houses burnt or anything like that, it never actually made the news, but it was apparently about 16,000 hectares, and it burnt out in 3 hours.
To build a gas field and introduce methane into that mix is just ridiculous. There were even volunteer RFS that refused to come up to this region, because one of the dangers with what's been going on in the Pilliga, such as the fracking that has occurred in the past, is that you can't smell methane. So you could be standing on a methane hotspot and you won't know it until the flames hit it and boom. So a lot of people don't want to risk their lives, especially as volunteers, for something they don't even support.
A concern we have with anyone doing development out here in the Pilliga scrub is, number one, their ability to set fire to the scrub. Number two, the people that are out there working, it's unsafe for them, because we know the potential of this place, and it can be very severe and very unforgiving. I'd be sceptical about their ability to remotely operate infrastructure. Reading in the EIS, they seem to think that running a 3 or 4 metre long bare flame flaring from a gas well through a total catastrophic fire ban is quite acceptable, according to Santos. You just got to have one leaf go through that flare and you're in trouble. Most of the gas field is to our northwest. If we get a hot nor'wester and they've got their flares running, then we're the first people to wear that.
It can be very scary sometimes. We recently, in 2013, we went through a massive fire through the back of Coonabarabran, and then that fire that started early last year, the Santos fire, that was almost 26,000 hectares that were burnt off. So we are aware of fires. We are very careful about what we do in this region, and that's why we find it ridiculous that flares can still burn in a total fire ban.
What we got here is a single access road in to this site, and you've got a huge Pilliga fuel load. She's all ready to go. The cypress is starting to dry off. Yeah, I think it's a huge risk. Huge risk.
In the middle of summer, you get a fire in here, it'll go like buggery. What you got there is an understory and a top story, and if the understory like this catches fire, it'll soon become a crowning fire. Up here, this was all burnt out in December '06. It was an enormously powerful bushfire, and you can see here It's killed all the trees. And this is the remains of the fence that was here. And that was, there's bugger all left of the old fence. It just, we only found wires on the ground. This area was all burnt bare, basically. You could see a kilometre into the scrub.
When Pilliga burns, it's not 200 hectares here and 500 hectares there, it's in the tens of thousands, and it can happen in hours. So the preparedness of the site, or the risk to the site, and particularly the people on the site, is bloody high, really high. Different crowd by the look of them.
Yeah.
About there, I'd say.
So with contacts within the RFS, we've managed to come across the Santos fire plan, which they have submitted, and basically it's a worthless piece of document. It's very thin, has no substance, and there is no plan. All they plan to do is turn off the wells remotely and leave the area. There's no fire action plan, they're not fighting anything. They are leaving it up to volunteers to risk their life in a gas field, surrounded by flammable gas, for their project, and it's just not acceptable.
Well, I first came to the Pilliga in 1993, working for the Forestry Commission, and I've been in love with the place ever since. To me, the Pilliga is the most important place in the world.
It's a wonderful place. It's so fresh, especially after the rain, the smell of the pines. It's lovely.
We've cleared 90% of the vegetation on the western side of the Great Divide. To be even thinking about knocking down the Pilliga for a gas field is insane.
Pilliga's the big jewel in terms of forests west of the Divide. It's the biggest area of temperate woodland, I think, in Australia. Biodiversity, incredibly high. It's a hot spot. It needs to be looked after.
My dad, when he was alive, he used to show us all the different things that we could eat, bush tucker and everything else.
All animals that drink and all animals that need an aquatic environment, this is where you're going to find them. This is being fed by a perched groundwater layer. The water table underneath the whole length of the Bahina Creek is only a foot below the level of the sand. We know Indigenous people used this particular species of mussel because it was the one found associated with Mungo Man.
As you drive through the Pilliga, you'll go from one soil type to another, and as we do that, we change the environment. And you'll go from black pine and gravelly ridges to ironbark to bloodwood to ghost gum, and all these are like different rooms in the forest. It's a place that deserves respect.
Santos is saying that this community here isn't an endangered ecological community, whereas the truth is that it matches all the requirements, and as well as that, it's an important surface groundwater ecosystem. This, to my mind, is a grassy woodland, and it's an endangered ecological community as well.
When you go out and have a look at the Pilliga and you see that 1 million wild acres, it's a beautiful forest, and it's one of the last wild places in Western New South Wales.
It is a unique place. It's something that draws you in. It's my home.
One of the reasons why Pilliga is so special is because it does have an Indigenous native mouse. And the Pilliga mouse has quite specific habitat requirements. And where the gas field is, it's actually covering about a half of the known range of where this animal lives.
We do have one of the highest loss of species in the planet, and it's largely driven by vegetation, fracturing and loss of the habitat that follows that.
They're planning to put 600 kilometres of roads out here.
There's 3 threatened fauna species which will be most affected by what's being proposed by the gas field, and that is the Pilliga mouse, koala and the black-striped wallaby. Pilliga mice are very cover conscious. Just a barrier like a road
could be an insurmountable barrier for a mouse like that because their main predators at night are owls. The mere fact that they're opening up the forest to all this infrastructure and tracks and putting all these checkerboard style pattern of disturbance through the forest, that's going to help the feral predators.
They always say it's no more than a tennis court size, but you can clearly see it's absolutely huge.
Have a look at chinchilla, have a look at Texas. It's like a virus. They come in, spot, 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 and then it spreads like measles.
People come here and they don't know where the water is, but where the major creeks are, it's only a couple of feet below the surface.
The general public believes because the coal seam gas project is predominantly in the forest that it's not impacting on land that's used for productive capacity. What they're not understanding is that this is an extremely biodiverse resource. This biodiversity is important to allow the productive capacity of this area. So if we lose the biodiversity in the Pilliga forest, it will have impacts on the broader catchment area being able to continue farming. So that's one value.
When I first came out here, and the very first day I even went to the Pilliga, 20 odd years ago, I stopped at a creek and I looked up into the tree and I saw 5 koalas. And I thought, this is a really good place.
We've had an ecologist study look for koalas in the Pilliga and they are still there, but they're in diminishing numbers. So to have an industrialised gas field in there with all the risks to koalas of traffic and increased risk of fire and less access to the water that they do need, it's going to be really, really difficult for them to survive.
When I said where the Pilliga has many rooms, each room's got a different species. So if you look in here, for example, that's an ironbark area, right? And further down we're into Quince country. And you go along another area, it'll have cypress pine or black pine. There's areas in the Pilliga where that's all ghost gums. There's a wedge-tail nest up here if you're interested. What I find is appealing about the Pilliga is if you sit and listen in the dead still, the whole place comes alive with birds.
So it must have been dead quiet after the fires.
Very, very quiet.
So do you feel that's all endangered if this industry goes ahead?
Silence certainly will be.
We're here 5 kilometres outside Coonabarabran, and the planet Saturn is one of the gas giants. Now these are the gas giants we want. We want to be able to see these objects in the sky, not have gas giants like Santos potentially destroy the beauty of our dark skies.
When we do talk about our unique industry in Coonabarabran, which, with the astronomy, it brings a new aspect into the fight. Because a lot of people understand those 3 big issues, air, land and water, makes perfect sense. But we have something unique to Australia that is under threat simply because of irresponsible flaring. So we try to bring attention in a new way.
Over the years, I've studied various objects in the solar system, asteroids that pass very close to the Earth and could potentially collide with the Earth. The idea is to discover them, calculate their orbits and predict whether or not they might ever collide with the Earth sometime in the future. Comets are also discovered as a byproduct of searching for the asteroids. I retired to Coonabarabran because of the dark skies here. There's been a policy to protect the dark sky status of the observatory. I moved to make part of the Warrumbungle National Park, an international dark sky park. We already have dark skies here, and it would be a disaster if these dark skies were lost due to any industrial developments.
So what we're looking at is dark nebulae, which is commonly referred to in this area as the emu in the sky.
To study the early stages of the universe, you have to look at these very distant, very faint objects. you need a dark sky. At the moment, the developments are in the northern Pilliga, but the intention is for the gas fields to open up the whole area surrounding Siding Spring Observatory. And if that was the case, there is absolutely no question that there would be an impact. One of the retired astronomers, Malcolm Hartley, who discovered a number of comets, one of which was visited by NASA's satellite and studied in detail, periodic comet Hartley 2, is now one of the best-known comets in the solar system. He locked on when they were clearing for new developments in the Pilliga. So that the passions are very high. The regulations are just so weak that essentially nothing need be done. Santos needn't debate anyone, and eventually it would just get pushed under the rug, forgotten about. The legislation is just hopeless.
The first people who turn up at your gate will be a nice husband and wife team, or a man and a woman, and they'll be bringing cookies. Yeah, and they'll come in and, oh, let's have some cup of tea. And if you still say no, the next person who comes in he'll be a bit tougher. You know, he might be a beefy sort of character, and he'll say, well, yeah, we can take you to court, you know. And we've got 14 QCs on hand too, if we do. How many QCs have you got?
When we came here 13 years ago, you couldn't see a light in any direction of a night. It was quiet and peaceful, and that's how we like it. If we wanted to live with lights and noise, we'd have went and lived in the city.
It is not an industry that has a light environmental footprint. Despite all the lies their spin doctors go on with, and the massive advertising campaigns that they've engaged in, saying that they're clean and green, they're not.
The government and the industry were promoting this as this is the best thing. They talked about coexistence, but they never gave you an indication of what it really truly meant and what was actually really going to happen.
They knew that they were going to do a major con job on Australia. And our governments were either naive or bought off, and people generally were completely unknowledgeable about what they were all about.
Representatives of the gas companies, you know when they're lying because their lips are moving. You cannot believe anything they say.
I'm proud of our environmental record. I'm proud of the way we operate, but our record does speak for itself. We're a responsible company. We've got a proven track record of safe operations. The industry is very well regulated, and we do everything we can to minimise our footprint.
I think when you look at the history of what we're seeing in Queensland, where there's quite serious allegations of impacts, the biggest problem is that the industry is not monitored and transparent to anywhere near the degree that government and industry claim. So the scientific basis for claims about the safety of CSG I cannot be sustained.
We see in Queensland, we see from the US what the coal seam gas industry does to country. It just turns it into industrial area that's completely unusable for agriculture.
We let this happen without so much as a whimper in our country. It's changed everything about our farming operation. We can't drink the water out of the wells anymore. We have to ventilate our homes so they won't explode because of the methane that comes out of the water. And probably the biggest thing that's happened is our property is worth nothing now.
They bring nothing to the table, and we ask them, what do you bring to us? What have you got that we want? They can't answer the question.
The Queensland Valuer General, with the very first well on a rural property, devalues it somewhere between 10 and 12%, and it's basically incremental thereafter. And obviously, if you're living next door to a property with a gas field on it, you will be impacted.
We have already experienced direct negative impacts, even though we don't have a single gas well on the property.
People just don't realise how much vehicular traffic and people you got on your place when they're drilling and putting in all this infrastructure. Something like about 200 vehicles per well.
This is the reverse osmosis plant at night. We were probably 2 kilometres away from it there. It runs day and night.
I would love to have here, show you my father's Petroleum and Gas Act. The whole book is fallen apart. He has, notes through the entire PNG Act. You know, that just shows you what level a landowner has to get to be able to understand what was actually going to happen on his farm, on his home.
There are families. This is a gentleman, he owns this property down the left-hand side of the well there. His family home was 1.7 kilometres away, and they became sleep deprived, and this flare goes day and night. He says it's like a jet engine just constantly going. And this is that same flare 40 kilometres away, and the light effect that it has.
A lot of people have walked off. Some families have been bought out, and there is a really big issue of mental health impacts and guilt, like how they cope with this issue of the fact that they can't leave because how do you take a huge family and move it? Where do you move it to? Where do you actually live?
Bob Catter was saying every 3 weeks is a suicide in outback Queensland.
When George took his life in October 2015, he was 68. That day, for whatever reason, that was enough. He'd had enough. And most people get to a point where they can't deal with it anymore, so they sign. And George refused to sign because that wasn't right.
They never accept any liability for anything that goes wrong. The best thing you can do is meet them at the front gate, lock the gate and have the fight up front before you let them put a foot on your property.
I cried when I left Queensland. I cried that we'd been there and we'd seen them and they'd shared their stories and they were just begging us to listen and to see what it really was doing to their lives. They'd shared so much. It is almost like our responsibility to not ignore their cry. They were begging us not to ignore it, not to ignore the seriousness of it, and to not be able to offer anything to them really other than to listen was really, really gut-wrenching.
Queensland was always the icing on the cake for these companies. It's where most of the gas is, but it's also my home. And now I go out to Chinchilla and I just see gas wells everywhere I look. And a town that's not really itself anymore, doesn't know itself. My heart just sinks every time I think about it.
We wanted to see it, and we came back totally saddened and angered to see what's happened.
I think Australians need to be really brave, not just in the country but as a whole now, and to actually ask, is this really what we want? Is this what we want for our future, and for what? You know, are we prepared to take that risk now? And I just know so many people that say it's not worth the risk.
In 2011, I went out there with some ecologists and we walked around what was then Eastern Star gases, Bibblewindi, coal seam gas wells. And what I saw was a catastrophe. Wastewater pumped into the woodlands, dead trees, dead kangaroos in wastewater ponds that were unlined, rusty infrastructure. It was a reckless, dirty industry who thought in some back country where no one cared, they could sneak in and do their worst, and they were doing exactly that. Look how they treat our beloved country when they think they can get away with it. That's the respect they've got. They'll pump their crap into the woods. They'll pump their crap into your water supply. They'll pump their crap into you. That's what this is really about. They will poison us for a buck.
At the June 2017 Narrabri Gas Project CCC, Mr Peter Mitchley, during the course of the discussion, came up and said, I'd like to inform the assembled here that Santos is not going to respond to the disposal of the salts. And he justified that by saying, we are not going to be responsible for the disposal of the salts because we are having a contractor remove them for us and take them away. Then the Department of Planning told him very politely, Mr Mitchley, believe it or not, legally, you are still responsible to maintain that those salts go to a registered landfill.
They're bringing millions of litres of water to the surface. To me,
opposing coal seam gas is a no-brainer.
Santos has been operating in the Pilliga for some years, and prior to that was Eastern Star gas. One of the developments that Santos introduced to the exploration project was a large-scale water treatment facility. That's known as Leewood.
What they do is they drill down to the coal seams. It's about 1k down, 1,000 metres.
Everything that you don't want on the surface of the planet is in that coal seam down there.
It's toxic. It's for water from a kilometre down under the ground that's sitting there amongst the coal.
When methane is exhumed from the ground, then there are all the naturally occurring contaminants as well.
The water that they do treat, we don't believe is going to be treated well enough. They're going to use to spray on crops out the front here.
Santos is very good at producing lovely green pictures of crops that are irrigated with coal seam gas water. But even in their own gas field, Fairview in Queensland, they eventually poisoned their plantation and lucent crop.
But I can assure you all that the government is listening. The government is listening to each and every one of you. If you'd like to listen, mate, if you'd like to listen. What we have done is we've banned evaporation ponds.
In 2011, when evaporation ponds were a very hot topic and many communities were arguing that these should be banned, evaporation ponds were banned, but we still have ponds. They're very similar to those evaporation ponds. In fact, they look exactly the same as those evaporation ponds, and we still have contamination results as a consequence of these ponds. This water should all be containerised. It should not be allowed to be in open ponds with liners. It just defies belief, it truly does.
In this EIS, they say we're going to clean up that water and irrigate. But what do you do with the brine when you clean it up? There's a lot of it. And if you work out the tonnes and tonnes of salt, where is it going to go?
They propose to use the produced water in dust suppression, which means that they put it in water tankers and they spray it on the roads. They also propose to reuse in the drilling process.
Water is their biggest enemy, a waste product to them.
These ponds over the back here, which are state-of-the-art, world's best, have been found to be leaking. Santos have tried to downplay it.
I went on the Santos tour and asked them where the salt was going to go. They said it was going to an accredited facility in Sydney, not yet determined. And I said, OK, what's the address? And they said, probably a disused mine.
They will produce 100 tonnes of that a day and claim it is general waste.
In the August CCC meeting, the discussion about salt disposal again came up, due mainly to a Four Corners program called Trash that had been aired slightly before. The question to Mr Mitchley was, in the light of the program and in the light that we're not sure what's going on, will Santos now respond to the disposal of the salt question? Mr Mitchley said point blank, I told you before, we won't discuss the salts. They don't want to answer the hard questions.
The two salts are there, potassium chloride and sodium chloride, in large volumes. People think it's just salt, but in such enormous quantities, it's a massive pollutant.
It's material that is very salty. You can't, I don't think, safely dispose into creeks and streams because you overpower the river system with this foreign water.
They're also talking about potentially flushing produced water through Bohena Creek. It meets the Namoy River, which feeds all downstream irrigators and all downstream communities. That has grave implications for this entire region.
Most of the time this doesn't have any surface water, but after heavy rain, streams can flow along the surface. Very rarely is it bank-to-bank water. You can see how even I've gone down 6 inches and the moisture content in the sand is really high.
Putting produced water into a creek to me seems like a crazy thing to do.
That sounds insane to me. What would you want to take water out of a coal seam and put it in a creek? It just seems completely mad.
Produced water
is wastewater. This whole idea of somehow you magically treat your water and then you can release it to the creek is just unacceptable in the terms of the chemistry.
This particular pond actually leaked. Results showed up that the uranium was detected in the water 20 times the drinking water standard. It was the first ever official case of aquifer contamination in Australia, and they got fined $1,500.
What occurred here is that both drilling companies discharged their fluids by one method or another into the forest from the drilling pad. The worst thing I've seen is these spills and the number of them. There's Bohena 2, Bohena 4, 44L where we are now, Bohena 5, Bohena 3, Bohena 7, Bohena 6. Then we go to the Bibbulwindi series. You've got Bibbulwindi 24, you've got Bibbulwindi 14. You've got the high point vent discharge that happened where Peter Mitchley says, oh, it was only 2 to 3 litres of water and 2 teaspoons of salt. But if you see the photographic evidence of it and see the soil analysis of the area, you know that they weren't telling the truth. And of course the major Bibbulwindi spill, which is, if you read all the reports, Santos told a big porky there.
You literally walk into the dead zone, there's no insects, there's no flies. How can there be a patch of Australian bush with no flies?
They've been trying to clean that dead zone up by reacting it with other chemicals. But what's happening is the salt has migrated down a few feet and is stuck above a layer of clay.
One of my friends fell into some of the soil there and had burns on her leg that came up later that night. And, you know, angry red rashes, and you're thinking, well, there's got to be something that's not right about what's happened to that soil.
The area literally became a wasteland. All of the trees died, nothing grew. That went to court. Orders were made that they clean up the area.
So what you're looking at here now is a mulched rehabilitation. Apparently they've spent some $20 million or something on rehabilitation of the different sites, but this is the major area. Mixed gypsum and spread mulch and then thrown the logs over the top of it. And then they water it to try and flush the salt and whatever's doing the damage here clear of the soil for rehabilitation purposes.
Cypress is the first thing to go and the last thing to come back. And it's still spreading. There's a big old cypress over there, which is behind this clump of bull oak. He's not officially on the pad where the kill zone is, but he's getting affected by it. You can see just a little frond out this side alive. The top's just about dead, if not. So he's getting affected by this spill. They stick all this water on here with the gypsum. It's going to flush up the salts, which is the idea of the gypsum, just to get it out of the clay barrier, which is very shallow. Get it up there, put it in suspension into the top layer of material, of the sandy material, and then move it down. Now it's quite legal. The New South Wales government said, use copious quantities of water, dilute the salts and move them on. Well, you move them on, they're going to create problems.
That water will run to Walgett, to Burke, all the way down to South Australia, and people will drink that water. People don't realise that it's going to affect a lot more of us than first thought.
The other problem, of course, is gypsum is also salty itself, right? And it also contains sulphate. The sulphates also feed the natural bacteria called sulphate-reducing bacteria. Now, sulphate-reducing bacteria by itself is not bad for you, but they produce hydrogen sulphide, which corrodes steel and corrodes cement. This is the bane of their industry. In a sense, this is like a cancer because it grows and nobody really knows how to control it. It's all trial and error. Every one of these spill sites is an accident waiting to happen. If it gets out and the people realise how big it is, their industry has had it.
So you were like the first person who sounded the alarm on all this, weren't you?
Yes, yes I was.
Stinky old water. It's come out of the dam over here and it's just gone right down through this watercourse, split it a bit each way. I'd suggest substantially more than 10,000, but anyway, 10,000 is the figure.
The Narrabri region contains sodic soils, When salty water is absorbed in sodic soils, it goes solid. What that means is that plants' roots can no longer penetrate the soil. So the soil is poisoned by the salt, as well as getting so solid that plants can't grow.
It's very hard to break. In fact, there's the colouring of the salts. There. So the salts are coming to the surface here, and this is what Santos is trying to flush away.
This was a plant that was dealing with the water from 23 wells. Let's go 850 and you know, this stuff is just going to be brought to the surface continuously, and they just haven't got a solution for it, short of dumping in a landfill. So.
Nothing lasts forever except a CSG spill, eh? Salt will get you in the end.
As a basically conservative person, I feel betrayed, angry, disillusioned that politicians don't look beyond the end of their nose and think about the future of this country, a country that only has one safe supply of underground water.
We do feel betrayed. The National Party, we couldn't have a more ineffective party to represent the interests of farmers. We've only got to see Barnaby Joyce's comments in terms of coal seam gas. He said that, you know, farmers could stand to make hundreds of thousands of dollars out of this. For a start, that is nothing more than a lie. And to farmers, what is ultimately more important is clean air, clean water, and land to grow clean, healthy food.
I wouldn't want a CSG well 5 metres from my property. It's going to affect my property value. There's always the potential for something to go wrong. So I understand why people are concerned.
We feel unbelievably neglected and betrayed by our government. I don't know who to even air our concerns with for them to be heard properly. It's so concerning when I look at the people who are going to be making these decisions that will affect the rest of our lives. What's in it for them? Like, what does it matter to them if our underground water is contaminated? It doesn't change their lives, but for us, it's everything.
They will never have a coal seam gas well drilled in their backyard. So I'd say to the politicians, why is my children's health not as important as your children's health?
What is actually happening in this country is that we're being raped of our rich resources, and we're not nationalising any of it.
The agricultural industry that we have is there to produce food for mankind. It's not there to be destroyed or interfered with or ruined with the contaminated water.
If CSG comes to this area, it will affect everything from pipeline infrastructure, which is completely incompatible with our soil, and the use of the land when we're trying to grow our crops and provide for our animals. Just not big enough for the both of us.
If we can stop this gas pipeline, basically it's going to stop the gas project from going forward. So anything to stop coal seam, gas mining is a benefit.
APA have come out and they've told the councils and they've told the people in their presentations there's nothing you can do about it. This gas line is going to come through, this pipeline is going to be given state significance, and it's coming through whether you like it or not. Read the National Pipeline Act, it's coming through. But it's not coming through because without social licence to lay their pipeline and without social licence to start their gas project, it cannot go ahead. It's as simple as that.
We live in a place in Australia that countries around the world would give anything for this food producing ability. And simply put, once it's gone, it's gone. There's no getting it back. We felt the risks are too great. So we've dedicated a great amount of our lives and time from our business to stopping this.
What governments are failing to consider is the cost implications. They're looking at the benefits, or the so-called benefits of this industry, but they're failing to take account of the large-scale costs and risks. And it's quite infuriating, to be quite honest.
For me, the political solutions are fairly obvious. It's about courage and it's about politicians actually looking to the future rather than party political alignments or actually being too scared to step out of their comfort zone.
One of the things that is a factor, I believe, in government's preparedness to accept these companies and let them come in and wreak their havoc is the revolving door. A lot of not just ministers but top bureaucrats will go into these companies after their period in politics or after they've seen the passage through the approvals process of the project. This is just not right.
This rush to royalties, rush to sell off our country, rush to get the gas out of the ground is so dangerous. It's so dangerous for the long term.
Is an economic return more important than someone's health or a community's health or a river or a forest?
I have no faith in my politicians about coal seam gas.
Every level of the government has let us down, every turn.
Why would they let a couple of noisy farmers get in the way of what they're doing? And they'll talk over us. And this is where we have representatives of regional Australia stepping forward before the EIS had even been submitted correctly to say, I'm supporting this, I'm behind this, Narrabri must go ahead.
It just outlines the complicity this government has with this dirty, toxic industry.
They've ticked the boxes in lots of places that we will never know. They've had discussions, they've lobbied. It's a greater force than we possibly can imagine at that level, but they're missing one key element, the people, and the people will respond.
One of the things we can't do is just say, oh, regulation will take care of it. If we don't know what the potential health harms are, how do we know that regulation will take care of it? And so it's very easy to say, and from an engineer's point of view, they might be thinking it's safe, but in fact, from a community point of view, it's not.
This is an industry you cannot regulate into safety.
Governments do not have the resources to actually know what's going on. They don't have the resources for the regulators to be able to go out there onto a site and say, hey, you're not doing this or you're not doing that. They don't know. They depend entirely on the companies to give them the information to know whether they're in breach of their conditions or not.
They seem to be able to breach things and then the government comes in and shifts the legislation behind them. They are showing their willful ignorance when they do not take into account within their approvals processes the science. When people say, I was just doing my job, well, I say, sorry, that's not good enough anymore. If just doing your job is going to cause a known harm, you're not just doing your job, you're culpable.
It's very important to me to be able to represent our community, and our community doesn't like CSG, and they've said so loud and clear. Absolutely loud and clear. And they're immensely proud of the fact that we've stood up to the big boys and said, we don't want you here.
I feel that New South Wales needs to take a leaf out of Victoria's book in banning this toxic industry, and Daniel Andrews needs to be commended because he's recognised the fact that this industry directly threatens the clean and green reputation of agriculture.
3.2 million hectares of people have responded at an average of 96% saying they don't want this. I mean, what are the government not understanding about a democratic process? Why are they refusing to acknowledge it?
I don't understand why the National Party is selling out the farmers. I don't know why they think that this is a safe industry. I just don't get it.
If it is National Party policy to run gas wells all over agricultural land in Australia, it is only the policy of the elected members. It is not the policy of the people of a National Party.
Our local member actually stood in the main street of Narrabri and accused me of being nothing but a fly-in protester. I was very upset by it, and I think a lot of other farmers who were there at the time were too.
The arrogance and the insult to the people on the ground of these people who say they represent us, but it comes where we just have to stand up and say, you're failing.
The government refused to acknowledge the input from a grassroots level right through to professionals and scientists. The government is ignoring the voice of the people.
Farmers are a very sanguine, accepting lot, and people say they get desperately depressed during the drought and everything, but they don't. They know it'll rain one day, and they accept what comes with the seasons, but they cannot accept the thought of the loss of their water. They're very, very seriously determined to not let this go ahead. I don't know if the government realise just how determined they are.
When you have no faith in government and no faith in the integrity of a company you're dealing with, people power is the only thing that helps.
We're all going to have to become environmental vigilantes to protect our environment and the resources, namely the water, that agriculture so importantly depends on.
It really is about collectively coming together as a community and as a team and as Australians to protect the lucky country.
All we can do is get out there and fight for our land, because we are the keepers of the land and we want it kept the way it should be.
The reason why I have always encouraged landholders to fight for their land is because I've seen many instances of landholders being trapped. So if you don't fight and you allow the miner on, then they develop their project, then you can't sell your land.
Our elected representatives have completely abandoned us. The political system, I believe, when it breaks down like that, then the people have to start speaking up. That's what the gas field free is all about. Everyone that we could possibly survey in the district was done, and they just said, look, actually, we don't want this.
I'm one of these typical farmers that wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's when the brain works. And the bins, I thought, well, you know, I'm living on a very active road where a lot of grain nomads come past. They use the artesian water system right through the winter, especially at Pilliga and Burren Junction. And I thought it was a great way of advertising the fact that this water could be destroyed.
I started letter writing, and then I started attending protests, and I will continue to protest. I would like to be a suffragette of the 21st century.
I've never protested against anything like this before. I've never stood up for anything that didn't involve my family. This, it just means so much to so many people for this not to happen.
And they are not going to win.
No way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. That's Ted Borowski from the Pilliga Road, Canamble.
Living legend.
Living legend.
And when Mum said, Dad's going to lock on, at first I thought, no way, that's just not possible. Like, Dad, lock on? You know, like, he's just, no way. You know, that's what the hippies do, that's what the Greens do, but not what, you know, Dad does. And he did it, and he loved it. It was incredible. It was inspiring in a way. He led us into thinking that this is actually a way that we might have a say.
Ted dived under and bolted himself on under a truck, and he was there for, I think, nearly 7 hours. The courage for someone to do that, and the fact that he felt it necessary to do that to be heard, I find very, very moving.
I felt that we needed to bring attention to the farming community. It was right out of my character. It took a lot for me to do that, but I felt strongly about something that needed to get out there.
So with the ongoing protests in this region, we managed to have David Paul. He's a local ecologist, very well respected in his field. He managed to lock himself to the Osmoflow truck.
I'm concerned about our future. I'm concerned about the bush. I'm concerned about our farming. I'm concerned about all those things. Seems to be only ordinary people concerned. Doesn't seem to be anyone the government's particularly concerned about it.
Sometimes ordinary people have to put their bodies on the line and say, I'm not going to allow this to happen.
Another day trying to save the planet.
People power. That's what we need, people power to get out there and to stop it.
We're here to show the government and show the people and show Santos and show all the coal seam gas mining people that we're fair dinkum and we're going to do whatever we can to succeed in stopping coal seam gas mining.
You can put down your cameras and leave. Thank you.
There's some wonderful, deeply concerned conservative farmers around, like Mark and Sharyn Robinson, who protested, and Ted Borowski. They're just lovely, genuine, hard-working farmers, and I am desperately upset that they have been put in the position where they feel that they've been abandoned.
Water is life, no CSG!
There's no handbook for how do you fight, you know, your own state government and the largest companies in the world who want to come and invade your farm.
I was fined, one of the heaviest fines that was at that time. I think it was in excess of about $3,500. It was an example, I think, that the government wanted to be made of me. The judge threw basically the case out of the window. To me, it was so important.
I've had elderly war veterans saying to me, we fought for our country, we were prepared to die for our country, we never thought we'd be fighting our own government one day to defend our country. And they are as determined as they were when they went to war.
Dad and I do have a very, very good bond, very strong bond. We've been arrested 6 times together. We've more or less walked out of court each time. The magistrates seem to understand what's going on in the world and have seen fit to to let us go. I've only finished up with like $650 fines all up, but Dad's, he's special, so he's walked out no cost at all. I think it's about the 4th arrest before we started to feel a bit relaxed about it. It's not easy. But you just realise you've just got to get out there and do it. We've been through years of just signing petitions and ringing politicians and attending protests, which the media never turned up to, and you just do too much, and then you think, no, you've got to take that little extra step and say this is important.
I got it into my head that we should do a mass lock-on. I managed to convince 5 other farmers and a fella from town that we should go and lock on to these rigs. Dad did it, you know, so let's just get in there and do it. So we turned up at around about 2:30 in the morning, so no pulling out now, we're going to lock on and that's all there is to it. We had no idea what we were in for. We're law-abiding citizens and never been charged or anything like that. So you sort of got to understand that it takes a lot to do that. So we all jumped in the car and drove through the scrub, marched right through the gates and just walked on, found a spot and locked on tight for about 7 hours.
The amount of gas they're going to get out of here will only feed China for a couple of days. We're trying to save this country for our kids for the next 2 generations.
This is the lengths that we as farmers are having to resort to.
Coal seam gas mining is bringing to the surface millions of tonnes of contaminated salt.
Without the Artesian Basin, mate, we've got nothing.
What we really need to be protecting is our land and our water and our rights. If there's a threat, then we have to get on it like a beehive.
We were packed up in the back of the cop cars and taken out of there. It's an amazing thing what it can do to you, is it can sort of throws you into this headspace that all of a sudden you're actually doing something. You're seeing that rig stop. It is effective, but now with the trespass laws that have been ramped up in order to stop that sort of protesting, it's just incredible that they all got together and they managed to pass that one.
In my view, it would be a ridiculous situation if a judge penalised a blockader in the same way that they penalised a rapist. 7 years prison, I mean, that is ludicrous.
If there is a threat of being locked up for 7 years, you'll still do this?
What a lovely rest for a farmer's wife, being locked up for 7 years. You'd have to question our government doing that, wouldn't you?
What is democracy doing? What is democracy in this country? Is there a democracy in this country? Does it exist anymore? Like, I mean, it doesn't seem to be what we say. Nobody listens. So, yeah, we've got to be louder, I suppose.
We all do different things. There's lots of people that probably haven't got the time to go out there, but they certainly can do a little bit of research these days and find out what's going on.
In the city, they don't really see it as something which is going to radically alter this country. It's going to radically alter our ability to feed ourselves. It's going to radically alter our ability to meet climate change agreements.
My biggest concern ultimately is carbon emissions.
We're just in denial. And as a farmer, I'm going to be at the forefront of the impacts, and we're at 400 ppm at the moment. And we're just going to progress into the future, 400, 420, 450. And at that point, God knows what's going to happen. We are mortgaging our children's future.
One of the two greatest commandments in the Bible is to love your neighbour. And I take a broad definition of neighbour, which includes not just the people who are farming this area and living in this area at the moment, but the generations that will come after us. It includes our neighbours in Pacific Islands who face rising sea levels. It includes the flora and fauna in the forests.
If we get to the end of this, and God forbid we get a bad result, then I know that I've done everything I possibly can to help.
I moved to the Pilliga 4 years ago. I came out here to help the community form a bond and drive out Santos. There's 1,300 men coming to rural outback New South Wales. I'd like to see people take direct action straight to Parliament House and straight to the cities. You just need to kick up a stink where you live, everywhere you live. If you care about New South Wales as a gas play, then time's now.
There are many, many wonderful people out there that are actually moved by the injustice to get involved, and that's what's going to win. That's what the government can't cope with.
I feel the fight against coal seam gas can be won. As people become aware of the facts about this industry, the chances of it getting a foothold are diminishing greatly.
Gandhi won Indian independence. Apartheid fell. Things that were seemingly impossible just happened. And it happened because people dug their heels in.
You can look at some of the Queensland landowners who have said no. They haven't gone to court. You know, we didn't go to court, Joe Hill didn't go to court, Brian Monk didn't go to court. So there's a number of landowners that have all said no and have just said go away, and nothing has happened to them.
The Joe Hill technique is to not let them in the gate. Until I've been proved wrong, I'll stick to it.
The view of our Senior Council is that there are still very good arguments for protection of improvements on landholders' lands under both the Petroleum Onshore Act and the Mining Act. There are a very significant number of landholders who are within the project zone in the Narrabri gas project. Those landholders can use the provisions of the Petroleum Onshore Act to protect their improvements. The changes to the law now provide that those costs will be payable by the miner.
I would encourage people by just saying we've had wins. It can be done and we're doing it.
In many ways, the most impressive campaign was actually Gloucester. A small community, already had mining in there. They won. They pulled together, they had some terrific leadership. They managed to win against all the odds.
The networking is massive.
I think that, that people need to stand up and be counted at the right time. I wished I didn't have to do it, but I'm glad that I did what I had to do.
What are you going to do with your spare time when we win this?
In St Peters, we won, and we did that by using everybody's skills.
The project really has to become unbankable, and it will be time that helps us there. It will be fighting and time, which results in the banks, the institutions, not being prepared to fund this project. And that's already happening.
I have a responsibility to see this out to the end. And I'm going to see this out to the end. Win, lose or draw.
We're definitely going to be here in 10 years if they mothball it. We're not going to just stop doing what we're doing. We will continue to be a presence.
So many good people, stewards of the land, are coming together, saying no, they will win. It's just a matter of time. We'll keep focused and we'll drive the buggers out.
I believe this is our asbestos and tobacco industry all over again, and I think we have a moral responsibility to future generations to stop it.
We will do whatever it takes to protect our land and our water. It is that important. This is a battle that we cannot afford to lose.
they should wake up to themselves and try and listen what the earth is saying.